When I was working on the movie originally, we hired somebody to do research and find out what kind of interdictions there were around the country about dancing. And we, of course, found that at a lot of Christian universities, there were laws against it, but there were also little municipalities here, there, a lot across the South, some up and down the coast in California, but they would have put a law into place because the town was so small and the facilities in which people could drink were so small that what they had found was people would bump into each other if they were dancing in a very narrow space, and that would lead to fights and people would pull knives. And so they decided to get rid of all of that just just stop the whole thing. You can drink, but you can't dance, so you won't stab somebody. I have, because I myself was a dancer and because I've attended dance all of my life and I have worked with choreographers and I have seen dance people do dances coming out and sitting in a chair on a stage. Bob Fosse, who I worked with on Pippin, choreographed a number that was famous for having the dancers walk out at the top of the number and with shoes, and they hammered nails into the shoes. They hammered the shoes to the stage and then stepped into the shoes and with their feet nailed to the floor moved from their ankles up, and that constituted dancing. So I've seen people restricted from the head up to dance. So I think that any kind of any kind of interaction to rhythm can be thought of as dance. I would my preference would be to define it as broadly as possible, so that people don't have too many areas to go, that's not dance and that is dance. I would sort of throw a very wide net and say that all sorts of human forms of human expression are dance, human movement. I actually worked on a lyric once for a song called "Dancing in My Car," because I live in Los Angeles and I drive up next to people and I look over and they're going, and or they're waving, or they're doing, but they're strapped in. They've got their foot on the brake, they've got their foot on the gas, they've got their hands on but they're grooving, they're getting down with it. How do you regulate that? How do you say somebody cannot move to the song that's coming over the radio? And it sounds like it's a blatant attempt to raise yet another class of fees, and they should just be honest about that and find some other way to package it. But to attack the Hawaiian character, such an integral part of the Hawaiian character, is terrifying to me, just terrifying. I wrote Footloose after I had won the Academy Award for Fame. I was approached about a lot of theater projects, about a lot of film projects, and nobody had an idea that I thought was very interesting because they all set them in places where you would expect to find music. And so I thought it would be interesting if I could find a subject about which I could write where music came unexpectedly, where it was not a given, like in a recording studio or in Nashville or on Broadway. And then I saw in the paper a very small item about a little town in Oklahoma called Elmore City, Oklahoma, that had finally lifted, after 88 years, a ban on dancing. And it was so old, and nobody in town, still alive, remembered why it had been enacted in the first place. But they had always abided by it. And this particular year, which was 1979, the high school class, which numbered 14, came to the city council and they said, it won't be a problem with you if we have a prom. And they said, no, it's a law, and it's always been a law. And they said, why has it always been a law? And they said, because it's always been a law. And that was the best that they could come up with. And the church got involved, the local minister got involved, and sides were drawn, and it came down to a meeting, a town council meeting, and eventually they allowed them the dance, and it made the papers. a little tiny item, maybe 4 sentences long. But I went, now that's someplace where you wouldn't expect music. So I actually wrote my first draft of the movie, outlined some of the particulars, and then I flew to Oklahoma, and I went to the town, and I spent almost a week in Ardmore, Oklahoma, which is down the road from Elmore. I had to stay in Ardmore because there were no hotels or motels in Elmore City. It's that tiny. And I went to the churches, and I went to the stores, and I went to the high school, and I interviewed people, and then I came back, and the rest is history. But like I said, when I came time to market, and when I started to try to sell this idea, people said to me, I like the idea a lot, but if we're going to make it, I think that what we should do is set it back in 1958, something like that, so that people would be more apt to believe that this might be happening. And I said, but if you do that, that's not remarkable. If it was 1958, that would not be remarkable that it were happening. The fact that it might be happening now is noteworthy. And finally, I found a producer who agreed with us. And when we were anticipating, the publicity department at Paramount was anticipating questions like this, we hired a graduate student at the University of California, LA, UCLA, and we gave him the task of finding out where are there laws against dancing, if at all, in the United States. And we stopped him when he passed 100. He found more than 100 communities, campuses, municipalities that still had interdictions against dance. So it was still ongoing. And to be honest, this is now, that movie came out in we made that movie in 1983. So now it's easily 30 years since we made that movie. Can I tell you that I give an interview like this twice a year, and have for 30 years, because Footloose still comes up and gets thrown into the conversation when people talk about banning dancing or lifting a ban on dancing. It's still topical. Oh, you know what? No, I see. I would do the lovely hula hands, because I grew up, with that being the great thing about the islands and the way that they taught you to dance in the islands is that you always had to tell a story. You were always telling a story with the humu humu nuku nuku apua, and the rain falling, and the breeze around the pali. And I took that very seriously to the heart. I think that I have had a career of telling stories, but I started it because as a kid I was watching people tell stories with their bodies and with their ukuleles and with their songs.